imperishable. Once upon a time, ever so many years ago, there lived a little old man and a little old woman. Very old indeed were they, for they had lived nearly 100 years. But they took neither joy nor pleasure in anything, and this because they had no children. They were now about to keep the 75th anniversary of their wedding day, known as the Diamond Wedding, but no guests were invited to share their simple feast. As they sat side by side, they went over in memory the years of their long life, and as they did so, they felt sure that it was to punish them for their sins that God had denied them the sweet happiness of having children about them, and as they thought, their tears fell fast. At that moment, someone knocked. "Who is there?" cried the old woman, and ran to open the door. There stood a little old man leaning on a stick, and white as a dove. "What do you want?" asked the old woman. "Charity," answered he. The good old woman was kind-hearted, and she cut her last loaf in two, giving one half to the beggar, who said, "I see you have been weeping, good wife, and I know the reason of your tears, but cheer up. By God's grace you shall be comforted. Though poor and childless today, tomorrow you shall have family and fortune." When the old woman heard this, she was overjoyed, and fetching her husband, they both went to the door to invite the old man in. But he was gone, and though they searched for him in every direction, they found nothing but his stick lying on the ground. For it was not a poor old beggar, but an angel of God who had knocked. Our good friends did not know this, so they picked up the stick and hurried off to find the old man, with the purpose of returning it. But it seemed as if the stick, like its master, were endowed with some marvelous power, for whenever the old man or the old woman tried to pick it up, it slipped out of their hands and rolled along the ground. Thus they followed it into a forest, and at the foot of a shrub, which stood close by a stream, it disappeared. They hunted all round the shrub, thinking to find the stick there, but instead of the stick they came upon a bird's nest containing 12 eggs, and from the shape of the shells it seemed as if the young ones were ready to come forth. "Pick up the eggs," said the old man. "They will make us an omelette for our wedding feast." The old woman grumbled a little, but she took the nest and carried it home in the skirt of her gown. Fancy their astonishment when at the end of 12 hours there came out, not unfledged birdlings, but 12 pretty little boys. Then the shells broke into tiny fragments, which were changed into as many gold pieces. Thus, as had been foretold, the old man and his wife found both family and fortune. Now these 12 boys were most extraordinary children. Directly they came out of the shells, they seemed to be at least 3 months old. Such a noise did they make, crying and kicking about. The youngest of all was a very big baby with black eyes, red cheeks, and curly hair, and so lively and active that the old woman could hardly keep him in his cradle at all. In 12 hours' time, the children seemed to be a year old, and could walk about and eat anything. Then the old woman made up her mind that they should be baptized, and thereupon sent her husband to fetch priest and organist without delay, and the Diamond Wedding was celebrated at the same time as the christening. For a short time their joy was clouded over by the disappearance of the youngest boy, who was also the best-looking, and his parents' favourite. They had begun to weep and mourn for him as if he were lost, when suddenly he was seen to come from out of the sleeves of the priest's cassock, and was heard to speak these words, "Never fear, dear parents, your beloved son will not perish." The old woman kissed him fondly, and handed him to his godfather, who presented him to the priest. So they had named him Niezguinek, that is, imperishable. The 12 boys went on growing at the rate of 6 weeks every hour, and at the end of 2 years were fine, strong young men. Niezgwinek especially was of extraordinary size and strength. The good old people lived happily and peacefully at home while their sons worked in the fields. On one occasion the latter went ploughing, and while the 11 eldest used the ordinary plough and team of oxen, Niezgwinek made his own plough, and it had 12 ploughshares and 12 handles, and to it were harnessed 12 team of the strongest working oxen. The others laughed at him, but he did not mind, and turned up as much ground as his 11 brothers together. Another time, when they went haymaking and his brothers used the ordinary scythes, he carried one with 12 blades, and managed it so cleverly, in spite of the jests of his companions, that he cut as much grass as all of them together. And again, when they went to turn over the hay, Niezgwinek used a rake with 12 teeth, and so cleared 12 plots of ground with every stroke. His haycock, too, was as large as a hill in comparison with those of his brothers. Now, the day after the making of the haycocks, the old man and his wife happened to be in the fields, and they noticed that one haycock had disappeared. So, thinking wild horses had made off with it, they advised their sons to take turns in watching the place. The eldest took his turn first, but after having watched all night, fell asleep towards morning, when he awoke to find another haycock missing. The second son was not more fortunate in preventing the disappearance of the hay, while the others succeeded no better. In fact, of all the 12 haycocks, there only remained the largest, Niezgwinek's, and even that had been meddled with. When it was the youngest's turn to watch, he went to the village blacksmith and got him to make an iron club weighing 260 pounds. So heavy was it that the blacksmith and his assistants could hardly turn it on the anvil. In order to test it, Niezgwinek whirled it round his head and threw it up in the air, and when it had nearly reached the ground, he caught it on his knee, upon which it was smashed to atoms. He then ordered another weighing 480 pounds, and this the blacksmith and his men could not even move. Niezgwinek had helped them to make it, and when finished he tested it in the same manner as the first. Finding it did not break, he kept it, and had in addition a noose plaited with 12 strong ropes. Towards nightfall he went to the field, crouched down behind his haycock, crossed himself, and waited to see what would happen. At midnight there was a tremendous noise which seemed to come from the east, while in that direction appeared a bright light. Then a white mare, with 12 coats as white as herself, trotted up to the haycock and began to eat it. Niezgwinek came out of his hiding place, and throwing the noose over the mare's neck, jumped on her back and struck her with his heavy club. The terrified creature gave the signal to the colts to escape, but she herself, hindered by the noose, out of breath, and wounded by the club, could not follow, but sank down on the earth, saying, "Do not choke me, Niezgwinek." He marvelled to hear her speak human language, and loosened the noose. When she had taken breath, she said, "Knight, if you give me my liberty, you shall never repent it. My husband, the dappled horse with golden mane, will cruelly revenge himself upon you, when he knows I am your prisoner. His strength and swiftness are so great you could not escape him. In exchange for my freedom, I will give you my 12 colts, who will serve you and your brothers faithfully." On hearing their mother neigh, the colts returned and stood with bent heads before the young man, who released the mare and led them home. The brothers were delighted to see Niezgwinek return with 12 beautiful white horses, and each took the one that pleased his fancy most, while the thinnest and weakest looking was left for the youngest. The old couple were happy in the thought that their son was brave as well as strong. One day it occurred to the old woman that she would like to see them all married, and to have the house merry with her daughters-in-law and their children. So she called upon her gossips and friends to talk the matter over, and finally persuaded her husband to be of the same opinion. He called his sons around him and addressed them thus: "Listen to me, my sons. In a certain country lives a celebrated witch known as Old Yaga. She is lame, and travels about in an oaken trough. She supports herself on iron crutches, and when she goes abroad carefully removes all traces of her steps with a broom. This old witch has 12 beautiful daughters who have large dowries. Do your best to win them for your wives. Do not return without bringing them with you." Both parents blessed their sons, who, mounting their horses, were soon out of sight. All but Nizhgnek, who, left alone, went to the stable and began to shed tears. "Why do you weep?" asked his horse. "Don't you think I have good reason?" replied he. "Here I have to go a long, long way in search of a wife, and you, my friend, are so thin and weak that were I to depend upon your strength, I should never be able to join my brothers." "Do not despair, Nizhgnek," said the horse. "Not only will you overtake your brothers, but you will leave them far behind. I am the son of the dappled horse with the golden mane, and if you will do exactly as I tell you, I shall be given the same power as he. You must kill me and bury me under a layer of earth and manure, then sow some wheat over me, and when the corn is ripe it must be gathered and some of it placed near my body." Nizhgnek threw his arms round his horse's neck and kissed him fondly, then led him into a yard and killed him with one blow of his club. The horse staggered a moment, and then fell dead. His master covered him with a layer of manure and earth, upon which he sowed wheat, as had been directed. It was immediately watered by a gentle rain, and warmed by the heat of the sun's rays. The corn took root and ripened so quickly that on the 12th day Nizhgnek set to work to cut, thresh, and winnow it. So abundant was it that he was able to give 11 measures to his parents, and keeping one for himself, spread it before his horse's bones. In a very short time the horse moved his head, sniffed the air, and began to devour the wheat. As soon as it was finished he sprang up, and was so full of life that he wanted to jump over the fence in one bound. But Nizhgnek held him by the mane, and getting lightly on his back, said, "Halt there, my spirited steed. I do not want others to have the benefit of all the trouble I have had with you. Carry me to old Yaga's house." He was of a truth a most magnificent horse, big and strong, with eyes that flashed like lightning. He leapt up into the air as high as the clouds, and the next moment descended in the middle of a field, saying to his master, "As we have first to see old Yaga, from whom we are still a great way off, we can stop here for a short time, take food and rest. I will do the same. Your brothers will be obliged to pass us, for we are a good way in front of them. When they come, you can go on together to visit the old witch, remember? Though it is difficult to get into her house, it is much more difficult still to get out. But if you would be perfectly safe, take from under my saddle a brush, a scarf, and a handkerchief. They will be of use in helping you to escape, for when you unroll the scarf, a river will flow between you and your enemy. If you shake the brush, it will become a thick forest, and by waving the handkerchief, it will be changed into a lake. After you have been received into Yaga's house, and your brothers have stabled their horses and gone to bed, I will tell you how to act." For 12 days Nizhgnek and his horse rested and gained strength, and at the end of the time the 11 brothers came up. They wondered greatly to see the youngest, and said, "Where on earth did you come from? And whose horse is that?" "I have come from home. The horse is the same I chose at first. We have been waiting here 12 days. Let us go on together now." Within a short time, they came to a house surrounded by a high oaken paling, at the gate of which they knocked. Old Yaga peeped out through a chink in the fence and cried, "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are 12 brothers, come to ask the 12 daughters of Yaga in marriage. If she is willing to be our mother-in-law, let her open the door." The door was opened, and Yaga appeared. She was a frightful-looking creature, old as the hills, and being one of those monsters who feed on human flesh. The unfortunate wretches who once entered her house never came out again. She had a lame leg, and because of this she leaned on a great iron crutch, and when she went out, removed all traces of her steps with a broom. She received the young travellers very graciously, shut the gate of the courtyard behind them, and led them into the house. Niezgenek's brothers dismounted, and taking their horses to the stables, tied them up to rings made of silver. The youngest fastened his to a copper ring. The old witch served her guests with a good supper, and gave them wine and hydromel to drink. Then she made up 12 beds on the right side of the room for the travellers, and on the left side 12 beds for her daughters. All were soon asleep except Niezgenek. He had been warned beforehand by his horse of the danger that threatened them, and now he got up quietly and changed the positions of the 24 beds, so that the brothers lay to the left side of the room and Yaga's daughters to the right. At midnight, old Yaga cried out in a hoarse voice, "Guzla, play! Sword, strike!" Then were heard strains of sweet music, to which the old woman beat time from her oaken trough. At the same moment a slender sword descended into the room, and passing over to the beds on the right, cut off the heads of the girls one by one, after which it danced about and flashed in the darkness. When the dawn broke, the guzla ceased playing, the sword disappeared, and silence reigned. Then Niezgenek softly aroused his brothers, and they all went out without making any noise. Each mounted his horse, and when they had broken open the yard gate, they made their escape at full speed. Old Yaga, thinking she heard footsteps, got up and ran into the room where her daughters lay dead. At the dreadful sight she gnashed her teeth, barked like a dog, tore out her hair by handfuls, and, seating herself in her trough as in a car, set off after the fugitives. She had nearly reached them, and was already stretching out her hand to seize them, when Niezgenek unrolled his magic scarf, and instantly a deep river flowed between her and the horsemen. Not being able to cross it, she stopped on the banks, and howling savagely began to drink it up. "Before you have swallowed all that river you will burst, you wicked old witch," cried Niezgenek. Then he rejoined his brothers, but the old woman drank all the water, crossed the bed of the river in her trough, and soon came near the young people. Niezgenek shook his handkerchief, and a lake immediately spread out between them. So she was again obliged to stop, and shrieking with rage began to drink up the water. "Before you have drunk that lake dry you will have burst yourself," said Niezgenek, and rode after his brothers. The old vixen drank up part of the water, and turning the remainder into a thick fog, hastened along in her trough. She was once more close upon the young men when Niezgenek, without a moment's delay, seized his brush, and as he waved it in the air, a thick forest rose between them. For a time the witch was at a loss to know what to do. On one side she saw Niezgenek and his brothers rapidly disappearing, while she stood on the other, hindered by the branches and torn by the thorns of the thick bushes, unable either to advance or retreat. Foaming with rage, with fire flashing from her eyes, she struck right and left with her crutches, crashing trees on all sides. But before she could clear away, those she was in pursuit of had got more than 100 miles ahead. So she was forced to give up, and grinding her teeth, howling and tearing out her hair, she threw after the fugitive such flaming glances from her eyes that she set the forest on fire, and taking the road home was soon lost to sight. The travellers, seeing the flames, guessed what had happened and thanked God for having preserved them from such great dangers. They continued their journey and by eventide arrived at the top of a steep hill. There they saw a town besieged by foreign troops who had already destroyed the outer part and only awaited daylight to take it by storm. The 12 brothers kept out of sight behind the enemy, and when they had rested and turned out their horses to graze, all went to sleep except Niezguinek, who kept watch without closing an eye. When everything was perfectly still, he got up, and calling his horse said, "Listen, yonder in that tent sleeps the king of this besieging army, and he dreams of the victory he hopes for on the morrow. How could we send all the soldiers to sleep and get possession of his person?" The horse replied, "You will find some dried leaves of the herb of sleep in the pocket of the saddle. Mount upon my back and hover round the camp, spreading fragments of the plant. That will cause all the soldiers to fall into a sound sleep, after which you can carry out your plans." Niezguinek mounted his horse, pronouncing these magic words, "Marvel of strength and of beauty, so white, horse of my heart, let us go. Rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight. Haste to the camp of the foe." The horse glanced upwards as if he saw someone beckoning to him from the clouds, then rose rapidly as a bird on the wing and hovered over the camp. Niezguinek took handfuls of the herb of sleep from the saddle pockets and sprinkled it all about, upon which all in the camp, including the sentinels, fell at once into a heavy sleep. Niezguinek alighted, entered the tent, and carried off the sleeping king without any difficulty. He then returned to his brothers, unharnessed his horse, and lay down to rest, placing the royal prisoner near him. His Majesty slept on as if nothing unusual had taken place. At daybreak, the soldiers of the besieging army awoke, and not being able to find their king, were seized with such a panic of terror that they retreated in great disorder. The ruler of the besieged city would not at first believe that the enemy had really disappeared, and indeed went himself to see if it was true. Of a truth, there remained nothing of the enemy's camp but a few deserted tents whitening on the plain. At that moment, Niezguinek came up with his brothers and said, "Sire, the enemy has fled, and we were unable to detain them. But here is their king, whom we have made prisoner, and whom I deliver up to you." The ruler replied, "I see indeed that you are a brave man among brave men, and I will reward you. This royal prisoner is worth a large ransom to me, so speak, what would you like me to do for you?" "I should wish, sire, that my brothers and I might enter the service of your Majesty." "I am quite willing," answered the king. Then, having placed his prisoner in charge of his guards, he made Niezguinek general and placed him at the head of a division of his army. The 11 brothers were given the rank of officers. When Niezguinek appeared in uniform, and with sabre in hand mounted his splendid charger, he looked so handsome and conducted the maneuvers so well that he surpassed all the other chiefs in the country, thus causing much jealousy even among his own brothers, for they were vexed that the youngest should outshine them, and so determined to ruin him. In order to accomplish this, they imitated his handwriting and placed such a note before the king's door, while Niezguinek was engaged elsewhere. When the king went out, he found the letter, and calling Niezguinek to him, said, "I should very much like to have the phonic guzla you mention in your letter." "But, sire, I have not written anything about a guzla," said he. "Read the note, then. Is it not in your handwriting?" Niezguinek read, "In a certain country, within the house of old Yaga, is a marvelous guzla. If the king wish, I will fetch it for him. Signed, Niezguinek." "It is true," said he, "that this writing resembles mine, but it is a forgery. for I never wrote it." "Never mind," said the king. "As you were able to take my enemy prisoner, you will certainly be able to succeed in getting old Yaga's guzla. Go then, and do not return without it, or you will be executed." Nizgunek bowed and went out. He went straight to the stable, where he found his charger looking very sad and thin, his head drooping before the trough, the hay untouched. "What is the matter with you, my good steed? What grieves you?" "I grieve for us both, for I foresee a long and perilous journey." "You are right, old fellow, but we have to go. And what is more, we have to take away and bring here old Yaga's guzla. And how shall we do it? Seeing that she knows us?" "We shall certainly succeed if you do as I tell you." Then the horse gave him certain instructions, and when Nizgunek had led him out of the stable and mounted, he said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, do not wait on the road. Rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight. Haste to the wicked old Yaga's abode." The horse arose in the air, as if he heard someone calling to him from the clouds, and flitting rapidly along, passed over several kingdoms within a few hours, thus reaching old Yaga's dwelling before midnight. Nizgunek threw the leaves of sleep in at the window, and by means of another wonderful herb caused all the doors of the house to open. On entering, he found old Yaga fast asleep, with her trough and iron crutches beside her, while above her head hung the magic sword and guzla. While the old witch lay snoring with all her might, Nizgunek took the guzla and leapt on his horse, crying, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, while I sing, rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight. Haste to the court of my king." Just as if the horse had seen something in the clouds, he rose swift as an arrow and flew through the air above the fogs. The same day about noon he neighed before his own manger in the royal stable, and Nizgunek went in to the king and presented him with the guzla. On pronouncing the two words, "Guzla, play," strains of music so gay and inspiriting were heard that all the courtiers began dancing with one another. The sick who listened were cured of their diseases, those who were in trouble and grief forgot their sorrows, and all living creatures were thrilled with a gladness such as they had never felt before. The king was beside himself with joy. He loaded Nizgunek with honors and presents, and, in order to have him always at court, raised him to a higher rank in the army. In this new post he had many under him, and he showed much exactitude in drill and other matters, punishing somewhat severely when necessary. He made, too, no difference in the treatment of his brothers, which angered them greatly, and caused them to be still more jealous and to plot against him. So they again imitated his handwriting and composed another letter, which they left at the king's door. When his majesty had read it, he called Nizgunek to him and said, "I should much like to have the marvelous sword you speak of in your letter." "Sire, I have not written anything about a sword," said Nizgunek. "Well, read it for yourself." And he read, "In a certain country within the house of old Yaga is a sword that strikes of its own accord. If the king would like to have it, I will engage to bring it him. Signed, Nizgunek." "Certainly," said Nizgunek. "This writing resembles mine, but I never wrote those words. Never mind. As you succeeded in bringing me the guzla, you will find no difficulty in obtaining the sword. Start without delay, and do not return without it at your peril." Nizgunek bowed and went to the stable, where he found his horse looking very thin and miserable, with his head drooping. "What is the matter, my horse? Do you want anything?" "I am unhappy because I foresee a long and dangerous journey." "You are right, for we are ordered to return to Yaga's house for the sword, but how can we get hold of it? Doubtless she guards it as the apple of her eye." The horse answered, "Do as I tell you, and all will be right." And he gave him certain instructions. Niezginek came out of the stable, saddled his friend, and mounting him said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, do not wait on the road, rise in the air like a bird, take thy flight. Haste to the wicked old witch's abode." The horse rose immediately, as if he had been beckoned to by someone in the clouds, and passing swiftly through the air, crossed rivers and mountains, till at midnight he stopped before old Yaga's house. Since the disappearance of the guzla, the sword had been placed on guard before the house, and whoever came near it was cut to pieces. Niezginek traced a circle with holy chalk, and placing himself on horseback in the centre of it, said, "Sword, who of thyself can smite? I come to brave thy ire. Peace or war upon this site, of thee I do require. If thou canst conquer, thine my life. Should I beat thee, then ends this strife." The sword clinked, leapt into the air, and fell to the ground, divided into 1,000 other swords, which ranged themselves in battle array and began to attack Niezginek. But in vain. They were powerless to touch him, for on reaching the chalk-traced circle they broke like wisps of straw. Then the sword-in-chief, seeing how useless it was to go on trying to wound him, submitted itself to Niezginek and promised him obedience. Taking the magic weapon in his hand, he mounted his horse and said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, while I sing, rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight, back to the court of my king." The horse started with renewed courage, and by noon was eating his hay in the royal stables. Niezginek went in to the king and presented him with the sword. While he was rejoicing over it, one of his servants rushed in quite out of breath and said, "Sire, your enemies who attacked us last year, and whose king is your prisoner, surround our town. Being unable to redeem their sovereign, they have come with an immense army, and threaten to destroy us if their king is not released without ransom." The king armed himself with the magic sword, and going outside the city walls, said to it, as he pointed to the enemy's camp, "Magic sword, smite the foe." Immediately the sword clinked, leapt flashing in the air, and fell in 1,000 blades that threw themselves on the camp. One regiment was destroyed during the first attack. Another was defeated in the same way, while the rest of the terrified soldiers fled and completely disappeared. Then the king said, "Sword, return to me." The 1,000 swords again became one, and so it returned to its master's hand. The victorious king came home filled with joy. He called Niezginek to him, loaded him with gifts, and assuring him of his favor, made him the highest general of his forces. In carrying out the duties of this new post, Niezginek was often obliged to punish his brothers, who became more and more enraged against him, and took counsel together how they might bring about his downfall. One day the king found a letter by his door, and after reading it he called Niezginek to him and said, "I should very much like to see Princess Sudolisu, whom you wish to bring me." "Sire, I do not know the lady, and had never spoken to her. Here, look at your letter." Niezginek read, "Beyond the 9 kingdoms, far beyond the ocean, within a silver vessel with golden masts, lies Princess Sudolisu. If the king wishes it, I will seek her for him. Signed, Niezginek. It is true the writing is like unto mine. Nevertheless, I neither composed the letter nor wrote it." "No matter," answered the king. "You will be able to get this princess as you did the guzla and the sword. If not, I will have you killed." Niezginek bowed and went out. He entered the stable where stood his horse, looking very weak and sad, with his head bent down. "What is the matter? Dear horse, are you in want of anything?" "I am sorrowful," answered the horse, "because I foresee a long and difficult journey." "You are right, for we have to go beyond the 9 kingdoms and far beyond the ocean to find Princess Sudolisu." "Can you tell me what to do?" "I will do my best, and if it is God's will, we shall succeed. Bring your club of 480 pounds weight, and let us be off." Niezgwinek saddled his horse, took his club, and mounting said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, do not lag on the road, rise in the air, through the clouds, take thy flight. Haste to Princess Sudolisu's abode." Then the horse looked up as if there was something he wanted in the clouds, and with a spring flew through the air, swift as an arrow. And so by the 2nd day they had passed over 10 kingdoms, and finding themselves beyond the ocean, halted on the shore. Here the horse said to Niezgwinek, "Do you see that silver ship with golden masts that rides on the waves yonder? That beautiful vessel is the home of Princess Sudolisu, youngest daughter of old Yaga. For after the witch had lost the gusla and magic sword, she feared to lose her daughter too. So she shut her up in that vessel, and having thrown the key thereof into the ocean, sat herself in her oaken trough, where with the help of the iron crutches she rose round and round the silver ship, warding off tempests and keeping at a distance all other ships that would approach it. The first thing to be done is to get the diamond key that opens the ship. In order to procure this, you must kill me, and then throw into the water one end of my entrails, by which bait you will trap the king of the lobsters. Do not set him free until he has promised to get you the key, for it is this key that draws the vessel to you of its own accord." "Ah, my beloved steed," cried Niezgwinek, "how can I kill you when I love you as my own brother, and when my fate depends upon you entirely? Do as I tell you. You can bring me to life again, as you did before." Niezgwinek caressed his horse, kissed him, and wept over him. Then, raising his mighty club, struck him full on the forehead. The poor creature staggered and fell down dead. Niezgwinek cut him open, and putting an end of his entrails in the water, he kept hold of it and hid himself in the water rushes. Soon there came a crowd of crawfish, and amongst them a gigantic lobster as large as a year-old calf. Niezgwinek seized him and threw him on the beach. The lobster said, "I am king of all the crawfish tribe. Let me go, and I will give you great riches for my ransom." "I do not want your riches," answered Niezgwinek, "but in exchange for your freedom, give me the diamond key which belongs to the silver ship with the golden masts, for in that vessel dwells Princess Sudolisu." The king of the crawfish whistled, upon which myriads of his subjects appeared. He spoke to them in their own language, and dismissed one, who soon returned with the magic diamond key in his claws. Niezgwinek loosed the king of the crawfish, and hiding himself inside his horse's body as he had been instructed, lay in wait. At that moment an old raven, followed by all his nestlings, happened to pass, and attracted by the horse's carcass, he called to his young ones to come and feast with him. Niezgwinek seized the smallest of the birds and held it firmly. "Let my birdling go," said the old raven. "I will give you in return anything you like to ask." "Fetch me, then, 3 kinds of water, the life-giving, the curing, and the strengthening." The old raven started off, and while awaiting his return, Niezgwinek, who still held the ravenling, questioned him as to where he had come from and what he had seen on his travels, and in this way heard news of his brothers. When the father bird returned, carrying with him the bottles filled with the marvelous waters, He wanted to have his nestling back. "One moment more," said Niezguinek. "I want to be sure that they are of the right sort." Then he replaced the entrails in the body of his horse and sprinkled him first with the life-giving, then with the curing, and finally with the strengthening water. After which his beloved steed leapt to his feet full of strength and cried, "Ah, how very soundly I have slept!" Niezguinek released the young raven and said to his horse, "For sure, you would have slept to all eternity, and have never seen the sun again, if I had not revived you as you taught me." While speaking, he saw the marvelous ship sparkling white in the sun. She was made entirely of pure silver, with golden masts. The rigging was of silk, the sails of velvet, and the whole was enclosed in a casing of impenetrable steel network. Niezguinek sprang down to the water's edge, armed with his club, and rubbing his forehead with the diamond key, said, "Riding on the ocean waves a magic ship. I see, stop, and change thy course, O ship. Here I hold the key. Obey the signal known to thee, and come at once, direct to me." The vessel turned right round and came at full speed towards land, and right onto the bank, where it remained motionless. Niezguinek smashed in the steel network with his club, and opening the doors with the diamond key, there found Princess Sudolissu. He made her unconscious with the herb sleep, and lifting her before him on his horse, said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, while I sing, swift as an arrow through space, take thy flight straight to the court of my king." Then the horse, as if he saw some strange thing in the clouds, lifted himself in the air and began to fly through space so rapidly that in about 2 hours he had crossed rivers, mountains, and forests, and had reached his journey's end. Although Niezguinek had fallen violently in love with the princess himself, he took her straight to the royal palace and introduced her to the king. Now she was so exquisitely beautiful that the monarch was quite dazzled by looking at her and being thus carried away by his admiration. He put his arm round her as if to caress her, but she rebuked him severely. "What have I done to offend you, princess? Why do you treat me so harshly? Because in spite of your rank, you are ill-bred. You neither ask my name nor that of my parents. And you think to take possession of me as if I were but a dog or a falcon. You must understand that he who would be my husband must have triple youth, that of heart, soul, and body." "Charming, princess! If I could become young again, we would be married directly," she replied. "But I have the means of making you so, and by help of this sword in my hand. For with it I will pierce you to the heart, then cut up your body into small pieces, wash them carefully, and join them together again. And if I breathe upon them, you will return to life young and handsome, just as if you were only 20 years of age." "Oh, indeed! I should like to know who would submit to that. First make trial of Sir Niezguinek here." The princess looked at him, whereupon he bowed and said, "Lovely princess, I willingly submit, although I am young enough without it. In any case, life without you would be valueless." Then the princess took a step towards him and killed him with her sword. She cut him up in pieces and washed these in pure water, after which she joined them together again and breathed upon them. Instantly, Niezguinek sprang up full of life and health, and looked so handsome and bright that the old king, who was dreadfully jealous, exclaimed, "Make me too young again, princess. Do not lose a moment." The princess pierced him to the heart with her sword, cut him up into little pieces, and, opening the window, threw them out, at the same time calling the king's dogs, who quickly ate them up. Then she turned to Niezguinek and said, "Proclaim yourself king, and I will be your queen." He followed her advice, and within a short time they were married, his brothers, whom he had pardoned, and his parents having been invited to the wedding. On their way back from the church, the magic sword suddenly clinked and, flashing in the air, divided itself into 1,000 swords that placed themselves on guard as sentinels all round the palace. The guzla, too, began to play so sweetly and gaily that every living thing began to dance for joy. The festival was magnificent. I myself was there, and drank freely of wine and mead, and although not a drop went into my mouth, my chin was quite wet. OHNIVA. A certain king had a beautiful garden which contained a number of very rare trees, but the most rare of all was an apple tree. It stood in the middle of the garden and produced one golden apple every day. In the morning, the blossom unfolded. During the day, you might watch the fruit grow, and before nightfall, the apple was fully ripe. The next day, the same thing occurred. Indeed, it happened regularly every 24 hours. Nevertheless, no ripe fruit ever remained on the tree on the following day. The apple disappeared. No one knew how or when, and this deeply grieved the king. At last he could bear it no longer, and calling his eldest son to him, said, "My child, I wish you to keep watch in the garden tonight, and see if you can find out what becomes of my golden apples. I will reward you with the choice of all my treasures. If you should be lucky enough to get hold of the thief and bring him to me, I would gladly give you half my kingdom." The young prince girded his trusty sword to his side, and with his crossbow on his shoulder and a good stock of well-tempered arrows, went into the garden to mount guard. And as he sat under the apple tree, a great drowsiness came over him which he could not resist. His arms dropped, his eyes closed, and stretching himself on the grass, he slept as soundly as if he had been in his own bed at home. Nor did he awake until day dawn, and then he saw that the apple had disappeared. When questioned by his father, he said that no thieves had come, but that the apple had vanished all the same. The king shook his head, for he did not believe a word of it. Then, turning to his second son, he bade him keep watch, and promised him a handsome reward if he should catch the thief. So the second son armed himself with everything necessary and went into the garden. But he succeeded no better than his brother, for he could not resist the desire to sleep, and when he awoke, the apple was no longer there. When his father asked him how it disappeared, he replied, "No one took it. It vanished of itself." "Now, my dearest one, take your turn," said the king to his youngest son. "Although you are young and have less experience than your brothers, let us see if you cannot succeed where they have failed. If you are willing, go, and may God help you." Towards evening, when it began to be dusk, the youngest son went into the garden to keep watch. He took with him a sword and crossbow, a few well-tempered arrows, and a hedgehog's skin as a sort of apron. For he thought that while sitting under the tree, if he spread the skin over his knees, the pricking of the bristles on his hands might keep him awake. And so it did, for by this means he was able to resist the drowsiness that came over him. At midnight, Onivak, the bird of fire, flew down and alighted upon the tree, and was just going off with the apple when the prince fixed an arrow to his bow, and letting it fly, struck the bird under the wing. Although wounded, it flew away, dropping one of its feathers upon the ground. That night, for the first time, the apple remained untouched upon the tree. "Have you caught the thief?" asked the king next day. "Not altogether, but no doubt we shall have him in time. I have a bit of his trappings." And he gave the king the feather, and told him all that had taken place. The king was charmed with the feather, so lovely and bright was it, that it illumined all the galleries of the palace, and they needed no other light. The courtiers told the king that the feather could only belong to Onivak, the bird of fire, and that it was worth all the rest of the royal treasures put together. From that time, Onivak came no more to the garden, and the apples remained untouched. Yet the king could think of nothing else but how to possess this marvelous bird. At last, Beginning to despair of ever seeing it, he was filled with melancholy and would remain for hours in deep thought. Thus he became really ill, and every day continued to grow worse. One day he summoned his 3 sons before him and said, "My dear children, you see the sad state I am in. If I could but hear the bird Onivak sing just once, I should be cured of this disease of the heart. Otherwise it will be my death. Whichever of you shall succeed in catching Onivak alive and inducing him to sing to me, to him I will give half of my kingdom and the heirship to the throne." Having taken leave of their father, the brothers set off. They travelled together until they came to a part of the forest where the road branched off in 3 directions. "Which turning shall we take?" asked the eldest. The second brother answered, "We are 3, and 3 roads lie before us. Let us each choose one. Thus we shall treble our chances of finding the bird, for we shall seek it in 3 different countries." "That is a good idea. But how shall each one decide which way to choose?" The youngest brother said, "I will leave the choice to you 2, and will take whichever road you leave me." So each took the road that chance decided for him, agreeing that when their mission was over, they would return to the point of departure. In order to recognize the place again, each one planted the branch of a tree at the crossroads, and they believed that he whose branch should take root and grow into a big tree would be successful in the quest. When each one had planted his branch at the chosen road, they started off. The eldest rode on and never stopped until he reached the top of a high mountain. There he dismounted and let his horse graze while he ate his breakfast. Suddenly, a red fox came up, and speaking in the language of men said, "Pray, my handsome prince, give me a little of what you are eating. I am very hungry." For answer, the prince let fly an arrow from his crossbow, but it is impossible to say whether he hit the fox, for it vanished and did not appear again. The second brother, without meeting with any adventure, reached a wide stretching moor, where he stopped for his meal. The red fox appeared to him and begged for food, but he also refused food to the famished fox and shot at him. The creature disappeared as before. The youngest travelled on till he came to the banks of a river. Feeling tired and hungry, he got down from his horse and began his breakfast. While he was eating, up came the red fox. "Please, young sir," said the fox, "give me a morsel to satisfy my hunger." The prince threw him a piece of meat and spoke kindly to him. "Come near. Do not be afraid, my red fox. I see you are more hungry than I, but there is enough for us both." And he divided all his provisions into 2 equal parts, one for himself and one for the poor red fox. When the latter had eaten to his heart's content, he said, "You have fed me well. In return, I will serve you well. Mount your horse and follow me. If you do everything I tell you, the bird of fire shall be yours." Then he set off at a run before the horseman, clearing the road for him with his bushy tail. By means of this marvelous broom, mountains were cut down, ravines filled up, and rivers bridged over. The young prince followed at a gallop, without the slightest wish to stop, until they came to a castle built of copper. "The bird of fire is in this castle," said the fox. "You must enter exactly at midday, for then the guards will be asleep, and you will pass unnoticed. Above all, beware of stopping anywhere. In the first apartment you will find 12 birds, black as night, in golden cages. In the second, 12 golden birds in wooden cages. In the third, Onivak, the bird of fire, roosting on his perch. Near him are 2 cages, one of wood and the other of gold. Be sure you put him in the wooden cage. You would be sorry for it if he were put into the golden one." The prince entered the castle and found everything just as the fox had told him. Having passed through the 2 rooms, he came to the third, and there saw the fire bird on his perch, apparently asleep. It was indeed a beautiful creature, so beautiful that the prince's heart beat high with joy. He handled him without difficulty, and put him into the wooden cage, thinking at the same time to himself that it could hardly be right for so lovely a bird to be in such an ugly cage. A golden cage could be the only right place for him. So he took him out of the wooden cage and placed him in the golden one. Hardly had he shut the door when the bird opened his eyes and gave a piercing scream. So shrill was it that it awoke the other birds, who began to sing as loud as they could and gave the alarm to the guards at the palace door. These rushed in, seized the prince, and dragged him before the king. The latter was very angry and said, "Infamous thief, who are you to have dared to force an entrance and pass through my sentinels to steal my bird Ornivak?" "I am not a thief," answered the young prince indignantly. "I have come to reclaim a thief whom you protect. I am the son of a king, and in my father's gardens is an apple tree that bears golden fruit. It blossoms at morning time, while during the day the flower develops into an apple that grows and ripens after sunset. Now in the night your bird robbed us of our golden apples, and though I watched and wounded him, I could not catch him. My father is dying with grief because of this, and the only remedy that can save and restore him to health is that he may listen to the firebird's song. This is why I beg your majesty to give him me." "You may have him," said the king, "but on one condition, that you bring me Zlato Enrivak, the horse with the golden mane."
So the prince had to go away empty-handed.
"Why did you not do as I told you?" "Why must you go and take the golden cage?" said the fox, in despair at the failure of the expedition. "I admit it was my own fault," said the prince. "But do not punish me by being angry. I want your advice. Tell me how I am to get Zlato Enrivak." "I know how it can be done," answered the red fox, "and I will help you once more. Get on your horse, follow me, and do as I tell you." The fox ran on in front, clearing the road with his bushy tail. The prince followed at a gallop until they came to a castle built entirely of silver. "In that castle lives the horse with the golden mane," said the fox. "You will have to go exactly at midday when the sentinels are asleep. Thus you will get past safe and sound. But mind, do not stop anywhere. You must pass through 3 stables. In the first are 12 black horses with golden bridles. In the second, 12 white horses with black bridles. In the third stands Zlato Onrivak in front of his manger, while near him are 2 bridles, one of gold, the other of black leather. Whatever you do, beware of using the first, for you will surely repent it." The prince waited until the appointed time and then entered the castle, finding everything exactly as the fox had said. In the third stable stood Zlato Unrivak, eating fire that flared up out of his silver trough. The horse with the golden mane was so beautiful that the prince could not take his eyes off him. Quickly unhooking the black leather bridle, he put it over the horse's head. The animal made no resistance, but was gentle and quiet as a lamb. Then the prince looked covetously at the golden bridle sparkling with gems and said to himself, "It is a shame that such a splendid creature should be guided by these ugly black reins, while there is a bridle here far more suited to him, and that is indeed his by right." So, forgetting his late experience and the warnings of the red fox, he tore off the black bridle and put in its place that of gold set with precious stones. No sooner did the horse feel the change than he began to neigh and caper about, while all the other horses answered with a perfect storm of neighings. The sentinels, aroused by the noise, ran in, and seizing the prince, led him before the king. "Insolent thief!" cried the enraged monarch. How is it that you have escaped the vigilance of the guards and have dared to lay hands upon my horse with the golden mane? It is really disgraceful." "True, I am nothing better," replied the prince proudly, "but I was forced to do it against my will." And he related all his misadventures at the Copper Castle, adding that it was impossible to obtain the Firebird except in exchange for Zlato en Rivach, and that he hoped his majesty would make him a present of the horse. "Most willingly," answered the king, "but on one condition, that you bring me the maiden with the golden locks. She lives in the golden castle on the shores of the Black Sea." The fox was waiting in the forest, the prince's return, and when he saw him come back without the horse, he was very angry indeed. "Did I not warn you," said he, "to be content with the black leather bridle? It is really a loss of time to try and help such an ungrateful fellow, for it seems impossible to make you hear reason." "Don't be cross," said the prince. "I confess that I am in fault. I ought to have obeyed your orders, but have a little more patience with me and help me out of this difficulty." "Very well, but this will certainly be the last time. If you do just as you are told, we may yet repair all that has been spoiled by your imprudence. Mount your horse and follow off." The fox ran on in front, clearing the road with his bushy tail, until they reached the shores of the Black Sea. "That palace yonder," said the fox, "is the residence of the Queen of the Ocean Kingdom. She has 3 daughters. It is the youngest who has the golden hair, and is called Zlato Vlaska. Now you must first go to the queen and ask her to give you one of her daughters in marriage. If she takes kindly to your proposal, she will bid you choose, and mind you take that princess who is the most plainly dressed." The queen received him most graciously, and when he explained the object of his visit, she led him into a room where the 3 daughters were spinning. They were so much alike that no one could possibly distinguish one from the other, and they were all so marvelously lovely that when the young prince looked upon them, he dared hardly breathe. Their hair was carefully covered by a veil through which one could not distinguish the color of it, but their dresses were different. The first wore a gown and veil embroidered with gold and used a golden distaff. The second had on a gown embroidered with silver and held a distaff of the same metal. The third wore a gown and veil of dazzling whiteness, and her distaff was made of wood. The mother bade the prince choose, whereupon he pointed to the maiden clothed in white, saying, "Give me this one to wife." "Ah," said the queen, "someone has been letting you into the secret, but wait a little, we shall meet again tomorrow." All that night the prince lay awake, wondering how he should manage not to make a mistake on the morrow. At dawn he was already at the palace gates, which he had hardly entered when the princess clothed in white chanced to pass. It was Zlato Vlaska, and she had come to meet him. "If it is your wish to choose me again today," she said, "observe carefully and take the maiden around whose head buzzes a small fly." In the afternoon the queen took the prince into a room where her 3 daughters sat, and said, "If among these princesses you recognize the one you chose yesterday, she shall be yours. If not, you must die." The young girls stood side by side, dressed alike in costly robes, and all had golden hair. The prince was puzzled, and their beauty and splendor dazzled him. For some time he could hardly see distinctly. Then, all of a sudden, a small fly buzzed over the head of one of the princesses. "This is the maiden who belongs to me," cried he, "and whom I chose yesterday." The queen, astonished that he should have guessed correctly, said, "Quite right, but I cannot let you have her until you have submitted to another trial, which shall be explained to you tomorrow." On the morrow she pointed out to him a large fish pond which lay in the forest, and giving him a small golden sieve, said, If with this sieve you can, before sunset, empty that fish pond yonder, I will give you my daughter with the golden hair. But if you fail, you will lose your life." The prince took the sieve and, going down to the pond, plunged it in to try his luck. But no sooner had he lifted it up than all the water ran out through the holes. Not a drop was left behind. Not knowing what to do, he sat down on the bank with the sieve in his hand, wondering in what possible way the difficulty might be overcome. "Why are you so sad?" asked the maiden in white, as she came towards him. "Because I fear you will never be mine," sighed he. "Your mother has given me an impossible task. Come, cheer up, away with fear. It will all be right in the end." Thereupon she took the sieve and threw it into the fish pond. Instantly the water turned to foam on the surface, and a thick vapour rose up, which fell in a fog so dense that nothing could be seen through it. Then the prince heard footsteps, and turning round, saw his horse coming towards him with his bridle down and the red fox at his side. "Mount quickly," said the horse. "There is not a moment to lose. Lift the maiden in front of you." The faithful steed flew like an arrow, and sped rapidly along over the road that had been recently cleared by the bushy tail of the red fox. But this time, instead of leading, the red fox followed, his tail working marvels as he went. It destroyed the bridges, reopened the ravines, raised high mountains, and in fact put back everything as it used to be. The prince felt very happy as he rode along, holding the princess with the golden hair, but it saddened him much to think he would have to give up all thought of marrying her himself, and that within a few short hours he must leave her with the king of the silver palace. The nearer he came to it, the more wretched he grew. The red fox, who noticed this, said, "It appears to me that you do not want to exchange the lovely Zlato Vlaska for the horse with the golden mane. Is it not so? Well, I have helped you so far. I will see what I can do for you now." And having thus spoken, he turned a somersault over the stump of a fallen tree which lay in the forest, while, to the prince's amazement, he was immediately transformed into a young girl exactly resembling the princess with the golden hair. "Now, leave your real bride in the forest," said the transformed fox, "and take me with you to offer to the king of the silver palace in exchange for his horse Zlato Ndrivak. Mount the horse, return here, and escape with the maid you love. I will manage the rest." The king of the silver castle received the maiden without the least suspicion, and handed over in exchange the horse with the golden mane, over whose back lay the bejewelled bridle. The prince left at once. At the palace all were busy preparing the wedding feast, for the marriage was to take place immediately, and everything was to be of the most costly description. Invitations had been out to all the grandees of the land. Towards the end of the feast, when everyone had drunk his fill of wine and pleasure, the king asked his guests their opinions on the charms of his bride. "She is most beautiful," said one. "In fact, it would be impossible for her to be more lovely. Only, it seems to me that her eyes are somewhat like those of a fox." The words were hardly out of his mouth when the royal bride vanished, while in her place sat a red fox, who, with one vigorous bound, sprang through the door and disappeared to rejoin the prince, who had hastened on in front. With sweeping strokes of his bushy tail, he overthrew bridges, reopened precipices, and heaped up mountains. But it was very hard work for the poor thing, and he did not come up with the runaways until they had almost reached the copper castle. Here they all had a rest, while the red fox turned a somersault and transformed himself into a horse resembling the one with the golden mane. Then the prince entered the copper castle and exchanged the transformed fox for the firebird, Onivak, the king having no suspicions whatever. The red fox having thus deceived the monarch, reassumed his own shape and hurried after the departing prince, whom he did not overtake until they had reached the banks of the river where they had first become acquainted. "Now here you are, prince," said the red fox, "in possession of Onivak, of the lovely Zlatovlaska, and of the horse with the golden mane. Henceforth you can manage without my help, so return to your father's house in peace and joy. But take warning, do not stop anywhere on the way, for if you do, some misfortune will overtake you." With these words the red fox vanished, while the prince continued his journey unhindered. In his hand he held the golden cage that contained the fire-bird, and at his side the lovely Zlatovlaska rode the horse with the golden mane. Truly, he was the happiest of men. When he reached the crossroads where he had parted from his brothers, he hastened to look for the branches they had planted. His alone had become a spreading tree. Theirs were both withered. Delighted with this proof of divine favor, he felt a strong desire to rest for a while under the shadow of his own tree. He therefore dismounted, and assisting the princess to do the same, fastened their horses to one of the branches and hung up the cage containing Onivak on another. Within a few moments they were all sound asleep. Meanwhile, the two elder brothers arrived at the same place by different roads, and both with empty hands. There they found their two branches withered, that of their brother having grown into a splendid tree. Under the shade of the latter he lay sleeping. By his side was the maid with the golden locks, the horse. Zlato Enrivak was fastened to a tree, and the firebird roosted in his golden cage. The hearts of the two brothers were filled with envious and wicked thoughts, and they whispered thus to one another, "Just think what will become of us. The youngest will receive half of the kingdom during our father's life and succeed to the throne at his death. Why not cut his throat at once? One of us will take the maid with the golden locks. The other can carry the bird to our father and keep the horse with the golden mane. As for the kingdom, we will divide it between us." After this debate, they killed their youngest brother and cut up his body into small pieces, while they threatened to treat Zlatovlaska in the same way if she attempted to disobey them. On reaching home, they sent the horse with the golden mane to the marble stables. The cage containing Onivak was placed in the room where their father lay sick, and the princess was allowed a beautiful suite of apartments and maids of honor to attend her. When the king, who was much weakened by suffering, had looked at the bird, he asked after his youngest son, to which the brothers replied, "We have not seen or heard anything of him. It is very likely that he has been killed." The poor old man was much affected, it seemed, indeed, as if his last hour had come. The firebird moped and refused to sing. The horse with the golden mane stood with his head bent down before his manger, and would eat no food, while Princess Zlatovlaska remained as silent as if she had been born dumb. Her beautiful hair was neglected and uncombed, and she wept. Her tears fell fast. Now, as the red fox chanced to pass through the forest, he came upon the mangled body of the youngest brother, and he at once set to work to put the scattered pieces together, but was unable to restore them to life. At that moment, a raven, accompanied by two young ones, came hovering overhead. The fox crouched behind a bramble bush, and when one of the young birds alighted upon the body to feed, he seized it and made a pretence of strangling it, upon which the parent bird, full of anxious love and fear, perched upon a branch close by and croaked, as if to say, "Let my poor little nestling go. I have done you no harm, neither have I worried you. Let him free, and I will take the first opportunity of returning your kindness." "Just so," replied the red fox, "for I am greatly in need of some kindness. Now if you will fetch me some of the water of death and some of the water of life from the Red Sea, I will let your nestling go safe and sound." The old raven promised to fetch the water and went off at once. Within 3 days he returned, carrying in his beak 2 small bottles, one full of the water of death, the other of the water of life. When the red fox received them, he wished first to try their effect upon some living creature, so he cut the small raven up, and joining the pieces together, watered them with the water of death. Instantly they became a living bird, without mark or join anywhere. This he sprinkled with the water of life, upon which the young raven spread its wings and flew off to its family. The red fox then performed the same operation on the body of the young prince, and with the same happy result, for he rose again perfect in form, and having about him no wound scars. On coming to life again, all he said was, "Dear me, what a pleasant sleep I have had." "I believe you," replied the red fox. "You would have gone on sleeping for ever if I had not awakened you. And what a foolish young man you are! Did I not particularly order you not to stop anywhere, but to go straight back to your father's house?" He then related all that his brothers had done, and having obtained a peasant's dress for him, led him to the outskirts of the forest, close to the royal palace, where he left him. The young prince then entered the palace grounds, unrecognized by the servants, and on representing that he was in need of employment, was appointed stable boy to the royal stables. Some little time after he heard the grooms lamenting that the horse with the golden mane would eat no food. "What a pity it is," said they, "that this splendid steed should starve to death. He droops his head and will take nothing." "Give him," said the disguised prince, "some pea straw. I bet you anything he will eat that." "But do you really think so?" "Why, our rough draft horses would refuse such coarse food." The prince's only answer was to fetch a bundle of pea straw, which he put into Zlato Onrivak's marble trough. Then, passing his hand gently over his neck and mane, he said to him, "Grieve no more, my horse with the golden mane." The beautiful creature recognized his master's voice, and neighing with joy, greedily devoured the pea straw. The news was noised about from one end of the palace to the other, and the sick king summoned the boy to his presence. "I hear you have made Zlato Onrivak eat," said his majesty. "Do you think you could make my firebird sing? Go and examine him closely. He is very sad. He droops his wings and will neither eat nor drink. Ah me, if he dies, I shall certainly die too." "Your majesty may rest assured. The bird will not die. Let him have some husks of barley to eat. Then he will soon be all right and begin to sing." The king ordered them to be brought, and the disguised prince put a handful into Onivak's cage, saying, "Cheer up, my firebird." As soon as Onivak heard his master's voice, he shook himself and made his feathers shine with more than their usual brightness. Then he began to dance about his cage, and pecking up the husks, sang so exquisitely that the king immediately felt better, and it was as if a great weight had been lifted off his heart. The firebird again burst into song, and this so affected the king that he sat up quite well, and embraced the disguised prince out of very gratitude. "Now," said he, "teach me how to restore to health this beautiful maiden with the golden hair whom my sons brought back with them. For she will not speak a word. Her beautiful hair remains uncared for, and her tears fall night and day. If your majesty will allow me to speak a few words to her, it may be the means of making her bright and happy." The king himself led the way to her apartments, and the disguised prince, taking her hand, said, "Look up a moment. Sweetheart, why these tears? And why grieve thus, dear bride?" The maiden knew him at once, and with a cry of joy threw herself into his arms. This astonished the king mightily, and he could not for the life of him think how a stable boy dare address such a princess as his dear bride. The prince then addressed the king thus, "And are you indeed the only one who does not know me? How is it, my father and sovereign, that you have not recognized your youngest son? I alone have succeeded in obtaining the fire-bird, the horse with the golden mane, and the maid with the golden hair." Thereupon he related all his adventures, and Zlatovlaska in her turn told how the wicked brothers had threatened to kill her if she betrayed them. As for these bad men, they shook from head to foot and trembled like leaves in the wind. The indignant king ordered them to be executed then and there. Not very long after these events, the youngest prince married the beautiful Zlatovlaska, and the king gave him half of his kingdom as a wedding present. When the old king died, he reigned in his stead and lived happily with the princess ever after. Tears of Pearls. Once upon a time there lived a very rich widow, with whom lived 3 children, a handsome stepson, his sister, who was marvellously beautiful, and her own daughter, passably good-looking. All 3 children lived under the same roof, but as is often the case where there are step-parents, they were treated very differently. The lady's own daughter was bad-tempered, disobedient, vain, and of a tell-tale disposition. Yet she was made much of, praised, and caressed. The stepchildren were treated very harshly. The boy, kind-hearted and obliging, was made to do all sorts of hard, unpleasant work, was constantly scolded, and looked upon as a good-for-nothing. The stepdaughter, who was not only exceedingly pretty, but was as sweet as an angel, was found fault with on all occasions, and her life made utterly miserable. It is, after all, but natural to love one's own children better than those of others, but the feeling of love should be governed by the laws of fairness. Now this wicked woman was blind to the faults of the child she loved, and to the good qualities of her husband's children, whom she hated. When in a bad temper, she was fond of boasting of the handsome fortune she intended securing for her own daughter, even though the stepchildren should be unprovided for. But, as the old proverb says, man proposes, but God disposes. We shall therefore see how things turned out. One Sunday morning, before going to church, the stepdaughter went into the garden to pick some flowers for decorating the altar. She had only gathered a few roses when, looking up, she saw quite close to her 3 young men, robed in dazzling white garments. They sat on a bench shaded by shrubs, while near them was an old man who asked her for alms. She felt rather nervous before the strangers, but when she saw the old man, she took her last penny from her purse and gave it him. He thanked her, and raising his hand over the girl's head, said to the men, "This orphan girl is pious, patient under misfortune, and kind to the poor, with whom she shares the little she has. Tell me what you wish for her." The first said, "I wish that when she weeps her tears may be changed into so many pearls." "And I," replied the second, "that when she smiles sweet roses may fall from her lips." "My wish," said the third, "is that whenever she dips her hands into water there shall appear in it shining gold fish. All these gifts shall be hers," added the old man, and with these words they vanished. The maiden was filled with awe and fell on her knees in prayer. Then her heart was filled with joy and peace, and she went back into the house. She had scarcely crossed the threshold when her stepmother came forward, and looking at her sternly said, "Well, where have you been?" The poor child began to cry, when, marvel of marvels, instead of tears, pearls fell from her eyes. Notwithstanding her rage, the stepmother picked them up as quickly as possible, while the girl smiled as she watched her, and as she smiled, roses fell from her lips, and her stepmother was beside herself with delight. The girl then went to put the flowers she had gathered in water, and as she dipped her fingers in it while arranging them, pretty little gold fish appeared in the bowl. From that day, these marvels were constantly occurring. The tears were changed into pearls, the smiles scattered roses, and the water, even if she dipped but the tips of her fingers in, was filled with gold fish. The stepmother softened and became more gentle, while little by little she managed to draw from her stepchild the secret of these gifts. So, next Sunday morning, she sent her own daughter into the garden to gather flowers, under pretence of their being for the altar. When she had picked a few, she raised her eyes and saw the 3 young men sitting on a low seat, while near them stood the little old man with white hair begging for alms. She pretended to be shy before the young men, but at the beggar's request drew from her pocket a gold piece and gave it him, evidently much against her will. He put it in his pocket, and turning to his companions said, "This girl is the spoilt child of her mother. She is bad-tempered and naughty, while her heart is hardened against the poor. It is easy to understand why, for the first time in her life, she has been so generous today. Tell me what gifts you would wish me to bestow upon her." The first said, "May her tears be changed into lizards." "And her smile produce hideous toads," added the second. "And when her hands touch the water, may it be filled with serpents," said the third. "So let it be," cried the old man. And they all vanished. The poor girl was terrified and went back to tell her mother what had happened. And it was even so, for if she smiled, hideous toads fell from her mouth, her tears were changed into lizards, and the water in which she dipped, but the tips of her fingers was filled with serpents. The stepmother was in despair, but she only loved her child the more, and hated the orphans with a yet more bitter hatred. Indeed, she worried them to such an extent that the boy determined to put up with it no longer, but to seek his fortune elsewhere. So he tied up his belongings in a handkerchief, took a loving farewell of his sister, commending her to God's care, and left his home. The great world lay before him, but which path to take he knew not. Turning to the cemetery where his parents lay side by side, he wept and prayed, kissed the earth that covered them 3 times, and set off on his travels. At that moment he felt something hard in the folds of his tunic and pressing on his heart. Wondering what it could be, he put in his hand and drew thence a charming portrait of his dearly loved sister, surrounded with pearls, roses, and gold fish. So great was his astonishment he could hardly believe his eyes. But he was very happy, and kissed the picture over and over again. Then, with one more look at the cemetery, he made the sign of the cross and departed. Now a beautiful story is soon told, but the acts of which it is the sum pass more slowly. After many adventures of little importance, he reached the capital of a kingdom by the sea, and there obtained the post of under-gardener at the royal palace, with good food and wages. In his prosperity he did not forget his unhappy sister, for he felt very uneasy about her. When he had a few moments to himself, he would sit down in some retired spot and gaze upon her portrait with a sad heart and eyes filled with tears. For the picture was a faithful likeness of her, and he looked upon it as a gift from his parents. Now the king had noticed this habit of his, and one day, while he sat by a stream looking at the picture, he came quietly behind him, and glanced over his shoulder to see what he was so attentively regarding. "Give me that portrait," said the monarch. The boy handed it him. The king examined it closely, and admiring it greatly, said, "I have never seen such a beautiful face in all my life, never even dreamed of such loveliness. Come, tell me, is the original of the picture living?" The lad burst into tears and told him it was the living image of his sister, who a short time since had received as a special mark of favor from God. that her tears should be changed into pearls, her smiles into roses, and the touch of her hands in water should produce beautiful gold fish. The king commanded him to write to his stepmother at once, and bid her send her lovely stepdaughter to the chapel of the palace, where the king would be waiting to marry her. The letter also contained promises of special royal favors. The lad wrote the letter, which the king sent by a special messenger. Now, a good story is soon told, but the deeds of which it is the sum are not performed so quickly. When the stepmother received the letter, she determined to say nothing about it to her stepchild, but she showed it to her own daughter and talked the matter over with her. Then she went to learn the art of sorcery from a witch, and having found out all it was necessary to know, set off with both of the girls. On approaching the capital, the wicked woman pushed her stepchild out of the carriage and repeated some magic words over her. After this, she became very small and covered with feathers. Then, in a moment, she was changed into a wild duck. She began to quack and made for the water, as ducks do, and swam to a far distance. The stepmother bade her farewell in the following words: "By the strength of my hate, may my will be fulfilled. Swim about the banks in the form of a duck, and rejoice in thy liberty. During that time my daughter shall take thy form, shall marry the king, and shall enjoy the good fortune, fate destined for thee." At the conclusion of these words, her own child became endowed with all the graces and beauty of her unfortunate stepsister. The two then continued their journey, arriving at the royal chapel at the appointed hour. The king received them with all honors, while the deceitful woman gave away her own daughter, whom the bridegroom believed to be the original of the beautiful picture. After the ceremony, the mother went away loaded with presents. The king, as he looked at his young wife, could not understand why he did not feel for her the sympathy and admiration he had felt for the portrait she so much resembled. But it could not be altered now. What is done is done. So he admired her beauty and looked forward to the pleasure of seeing pearls fall from her eyes, roses from her lips, and goldfish at the touch of her fingers. During the wedding feast, the newly made bride forgot herself and smiled at her husband. Immediately a number of hideous toads escaped from her lips. The king, overcome with horror and disgust, rushed away from her, upon which she began to cry. But instead of pearls, lizards fell from her eyes. The major domo ordered water to be brought for her to wash her hands. But no sooner had she dipped the tips of her fingers in the bowl than it was filled with serpents that hissed and twisted and threw themselves among the wedding guests. The panic was general, and a scene of great confusion followed. The guard was called in and had the greatest trouble to clear the hall of the disgusting reptiles. The bridegroom had taken refuge in the garden, and when he saw the young man coming towards him, whom he thought had deceived him, his anger overcame him, and he struck the poor lad with so much force that he fell down dead. The queen ran forward sobbing, and taking the king by the hand said, "What have you done? You have killed my innocent brother. It is neither my fault, nor was it his, that since the wedding I have by some enchantment lost the marvelous power I possessed before. This evil will pass away in time, but time can never restore to me my dear brother, my own mother's son. Forgive me, dear wife. In a moment of irritation I thought he had deceived me, and I wanted to punish him, but did not mean to kill. I regret it deeply, but it cannot be helped now. Forgive me my fault as I forgive yours, with all my heart. You have my forgiveness, but I beg you to see that your wife's brother has an honorable burial." Her wishes were carried out, and the orphan lad, who had passed as her brother, was laid in a handsome coffin. The chapel was hung with black, and at night a guard was placed both inside and out. Towards midnight, the church doors silently opened, and while the guards were overcome by sleep, a pretty little duck entered unnoticed. She stopped in the middle of the aisle, shook herself, and pulled out her feathers one by one. Then it took the form of the beautiful stepdaughter, for it was she. She went up to her brother's coffin and stood gazing at him, and as she looked, she wept sorrowfully. Then she put on her feathers again and went out a duck. When the guards awoke, they were astonished to find a quantity of fine pearls in the coffin. Next day they told the king that the doors had opened of themselves towards midnight, that they had been overcome by sleep, and that on awakening they had found a large number of pearls in the coffin, but knew not how they got there. The king was very much surprised, especially at the appearance of the pearls that ought to have been produced by his wife's tears. On the second night he doubled the guard, and impressed upon them the necessity for watchfulness. At midnight the doors again opened silently as before. The soldiers went to sleep, and the same little duck entered and, taking out her feathers, appeared as a lovely maiden. She could not help smiling as she looked upon the sleeping soldiers, the number of which had been doubled on her account. And, as she smiled, a number of roses fell from her lips. As she drew near her brother, her tears fell in torrents, leaving a profusion of fine pearls. After some time she put on her feathers and went out a duck. When the guards awoke, they took the roses and the pearls to the king. He was still more surprised to see roses with the pearls, for these roses should have fallen from his wife's lips. He again increased the number of the guard, and threatened them with the most severe punishment if they failed to watch all night. They did their best to obey, but in vain. They could only sleep. When they awoke, they found not only roses and pearls, but little gold fish swimming in the holy water. The amazed king could only conclude that their sleep was caused by magic. On the fourth night he not only increased the number of soldiers, but, unknown to everyone, hid himself behind the altar, where he hung a mirror, through which he could see everything that passed without being seen. At midnight the doors opened. The soldiers, under the influence of sleep, had let fall their arms and lay on the ground. The king kept his eyes fixed on the mirror, through which he saw a little wild duck enter. It looked timidly round on all sides, then, reassured at the sight of the sleeping guards, advanced to the centre of the nave and took off its feathers, thus appearing as a young maiden of exquisite beauty. The king, overwhelmed with joy and admiration, had a presentiment that this was his true bride. So when she drew near the coffin, he crept noiselessly out of his hiding-place, and with a lighted taper set fire to the feathers. They flared up immediately, and with such a bright light that the soldiers were aroused. The girl ran towards the monarch, wringing her hands and weeping tears of pearl. "What have you done?" cried she. "How can I now escape my stepmother's vengeance? For it is by her magic that I have been changed into a wild duck." When the king had heard all, he ordered some of his soldiers to seize the wife he had married and to take her right out of the country. He sent others to take the wicked stepmother prisoner, and to burn her as a witch. Both commands were instantly carried out. Meanwhile, the girl drew from the folds of her gown 3 small bottles, filled with 3 different kinds of water, which she had brought from the sea. The first possessed the virtue of restoring life. This she sprinkled over her brother, whereupon the chill and rigidity of death disappeared, the colour came to his face, and warm red blood flowed from his wound. Upon the wound she poured water from the second bottle, and it was immediately healed. When she had made use of the third kind of water, he opened his eyes, looked at her with astonishment, and threw himself joyfully into her arms. The king, enraptured at this sight, conducted the two back to the palace. So instead of a funeral, there was a wedding, to which a large number of guests were immediately invited. Thus, the orphan maid was married to the king, while her brother became one of his majesty's nobles, and the magnificence of the wedding feast was greater than anything seen or heard of. The sluggard. On the banks of a certain river, where there was always good fishing, lived an old man and his 3 sons. The 2 eldest were sharp-witted, active young men. Already married, the youngest was stupid and idle, and a bachelor. When the father was dying, he called his children to him and told them how he had left his property. The house was for his 2 married sons, with a sum of 300 florins each. After his death he was buried with great pomp, and after the funeral there was a splendid feast. All these honours were supposed to be for the benefit of the man's soul. When the elder brothers took possession of their inheritance, they said to the youngest, "Listen, brother, let us take charge of your share of the money, for we intend going out into the world as merchants, and when we have made a great deal of money, we will buy you a hat, a sash, and a pair of red boots. You will be better at home, and mind you do as your sisters-in-law tell you." For a long time this silly fellow had been wanting a cap, a sash, and a pair of red boots. So he was easily persuaded to give up all his money. The brothers set out on their travels and crossed the sea in search of fortune. The fool of the family remained at home, and, as he was an out-and-out sluggard, he would lie whole days at a time on the warm stove without doing a stroke of work, and only obeying his sisters-in-law with the greatest reluctance. He liked fried onions, potato soup, and cider better than anything else in the world. One day his sisters-in-law asked him to fetch them some water. It was winter, and a hard frost, moreover. The sluggard did not feel at all inclined to go out. So he said, "Go yourselves, I prefer to stay here by the fire." "Stupid boy, go at once. We will have some onions, potato soup, and cider, ready for you when you come back. If you refuse to do what we ask you, we shall tell our husbands, and then there will be neither cap, sash, nor red boots for you." At these words, the sluggard thought he had better go. So he rolled off the stove, took a hatchet and a couple of pails, and went down to the river. On the surface of the water, where the ice had been broken, was a large pike. The sluggard seized him by the fins and pulled him out. "If you will let me go," said the pike, "I promise to give you everything you wish for." "Well then, I should like all my desires to be fulfilled the moment I utter them." "You shall have everything you want the moment you pronounce these words, 'At my behest, and by the orders of the pike may such and such things happen, as I like.'" "Just wait one moment while I try the effect," said the sluggard, and began at once to say, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, bring onions, cider, soup, just as I like." That very moment his favourite dishes were before him. Having eaten a large quantity, he said, very good indeed, but will it always be the same?" "Always," replied the pike. The sluggard put the pike back into the river, and turning towards his bucket said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, walk home yourselves. My pails that I should like." The pails, and the strong rod to which they were fastened, immediately set off and walked solemnly along, the sluggard following them with his hands in his pockets. When they reached the house, he put them in their places, and again stretched himself out to enjoy the warmth of the stove. Presently the sisters-in-law said, "Come and chop some wood for us." "Bother, do it yourselves. It is not fit work for women. Besides, if you don't do it, the stove will be cold, and then you will be the chief sufferer. Moreover, pay attention to what we say, for if you do not obey us, there will be no red boots nor any other pretty things." The sluggard then just sat up and said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, let what my sisters want be done, that's what I like." Instantly the hatchet came out from behind a stool and chopped up a large heap of wood, put a part of it on the stove, and retired to its corner. All this time the sluggard was eating and drinking at his ease. Another day some wood had to be brought from the forest. Our sluggard now thought he would like to show off before the villagers, so he pulled a sledge out of the shed, loaded it with onions and soup, after which he pronounced the magic words. The sledge started off, and passing through the village at a rattling pace, ran over several people and frightened the women and children. When the forest was reached, our friend looked on while the blocks of wood and faggots cut, tied, and laid themselves on the sledge, after which they set off home again. But when they got to the middle of the village, the men, who had been hurt and frightened in the morning, seized hold of the sluggard and pulled him off the sledge, dragging him along by the hair to give him a sound thrashing. At first he thought it was only a joke, but when the blows hurt his shoulders, he said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, come, faggots, haste, and my assailants strike." In a moment all the blocks of wood and faggots jumped off the sledge and began to hit right and left, and they hit so well that the men were glad to get out of the way as best they could. The sluggard laughed at them till his sides ached. Then he remounted his sledge and was soon lying on the stove again. From that day he became famous, and his doings were talked about all through the country. At last even the king heard of him, and, his curiosity being aroused, he sent some of his soldiers to fetch him. "Now then, booby," said the soldier, "come down off that stove and follow me to the king's palace." "Why should I? There is as much cider, onions, and soup as I want at home." The man, indignant at his want of respect, struck him, upon which the sluggard said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, may this man get a taste of what a broom is like." A large broom, and not particularly clean, immediately hopped up, and first dipping itself in a pail of water, beat the soldier so mercilessly that he was obliged to escape through the window, whence he returned to the king. His Majesty, amazed at the sluggard's refusal, sent another messenger. This man was cuter than his comrade, and first made inquiries as to the sluggard's tastes. Then he went up to him and said, "Good day, my friend. Will you come with me to see the king? He wishes to present you with a cap, a waistband, and a pair of red boots." "With the greatest pleasure. You go on. I will soon overtake you." Then he ate as much as he could of his favourite dishes and went to sleep on the stove. He slept so long that at last his sisters-in-law woke him up and told him he would be late if he did not at once go to see the king. The lazy fellow said nothing but these words, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, this stove to carry me before the king I'd like." At the very same instant the stove moved from its place and carried him right up to the palace door. The king was filled with amazement, and running out, followed by the whole court, asked the sluggard what he would like to have. "I have merely come to fetch the hat, waistband, and red boots you promised me." Just then the charming Princess Gapiomila came to find out what was going on. Directly the sluggard saw her, he thought her so enchanting that he whispered to himself, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, that this princess so fair may love me, I should like." Then he ordered his stove to take him back home, and when there he continued to eat onions and soup and to drink cider. Meanwhile the princess had fallen in love with him and begged her father to send for him again. As the sluggard would not consent, the king had him bound when asleep and thus brought to the palace. Then he summoned a celebrated magician, who, at his orders, shut the princess and sluggard up in a crystal cask, to which was fastened a balloon well filled with gas, and sent it up in the air among the clouds. The princess wept bitterly, but the fool sat still and said he felt very comfortable. At last she persuaded him to exert his powers, so he said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, this cask of crystal earth at once must strike upon the friendly island I should like." The crystal cask immediately descended, and opened upon a hospitable island where travellers could have all they wanted by simply wishing for it. The princess and her companion walked about, eating when hungry and drinking when athirst. The sluggard was very happy and contented, but the lady begged him to wish for a palace. Instantly the palace made its appearance. It was built of white marble, with crystal windows, roof of yellow amber, and golden furniture. She was delighted with it. Next day she wanted a good road made, along which she could go to see her father. Immediately there stretched before them a fairy-like bridge made of crystal, having golden balustrades set with diamonds and leading right up to the king's palace. The sluggard was just about to accompany the princess when he began to think of his own appearance and to feel ashamed that such an awkward, stupid fellow as he should walk by the side of such a lovely and graceful creature. So he said, "At my behest, and by the orders of the pike, to be both handsome, wise, and clever, I should like." Suddenly he became as handsome, wise, and clever as it was possible to be. Then he got into a gorgeous carriage with Capiomila, and they drove across the bridge that led to the king's palace. There they were received with every mark of joy and affection. The king gave them his blessing, and they were married the same evening. An immense number of guests were invited to the wedding feast. I, too, was there, and drank freely of wine and hydromel. And this is the story I have done my best to tell you as faithfully as possible. King Cach, Martinco. Once upon a time, there was a poor woman who had an only daughter named Helen, a very lazy girl. One day, when she had refused to do a single thing, her mother took her down to the banks of a stream and began to strike her fingers with a flat stone, just as you do in beating linen to wash it. The girl cried a good deal. A prince, lord of the Red Castle, happened at that moment to pass by, and inquired as to the cause of such treatment, for it horrified him that a mother should so ill use her child. "Why should I not punish her?" answered the woman. "The idle girl can do nothing but spin hemp into gold thread." "Really?" cried he. "Does she really know how to spin gold thread out of hemp? If that be so, sell her to me." "Willingly. How much will you give me for her?" "Half a measure of gold." "Take her," said the mother, and she gave him her daughter as soon as the money was paid. The prince placed the girl behind him on the saddle, put spurs to his horse, and took her home. On reaching the Red Castle, the prince led Helen into a room filled from floor to ceiling with hemp, and having supplied her with distaff and spinning wheel, said, "When you have spun all this hemp into gold thread, I will make you my wife." Then he went out, locking the door after him. On finding herself a prisoner, the poor girl wept as if her heart would break. Suddenly she saw a very odd-looking little man seated on the window-sill. He wore a red cap, and his boots were made of some strange sort of material. "Why do you weep so?" he asked. "I cannot help it," she replied. "I am but a miserable slave. I have been ordered to spin all this hemp into gold thread, but it is impossible. I can never do it, and I know not what will become of me. I will do it for you in 3 days, on condition that at the end of that time you guess my right name and tell me what the boots I am wearing now are made of." Without for one moment reflecting as to whether she would be able to guess aright, she consented. The uncanny little man burst out laughing, and taking her distaff set to work at once. All day As the distaff moved, the hemp grew visibly less, while the skein of gold thread became larger and larger. The little man spun all the time, and, without stopping an instant, explained to Helen how to make thread of pure gold. As night drew on, he tied up the skein, saying to the girl, "Well, do you know my name yet? Can you tell me what my boots are made of?" Helen replied that she could not, upon which he grinned and disappeared through the window. She then sat and looked at the sky, and thought, and thought, and thought, and lost herself in conjecturing as to what the little man's name might be, and in trying to guess what was the stuff his boots were made of. Were they of leather? Or perhaps plaited rushes? Or straw? Or cast iron? No, they did not look like anything of that sort. And as to his name, that was a still more difficult problem to solve. "What shall I call him?" said she to herself. "John or Henry? Who knows? Perhaps it is Paul or Joseph." These thoughts so filled her mind that she forgot to eat her dinner. Her meditations were interrupted by cries and groans from outside, where she saw an old man with white hair sitting under the castle wall. "Miserable old man that I am!" cried he. "I die of hunger and thirst." But no one pities my sufferings. Helen hastened to give him her dinner and told him to come next day, which he promised to do. After again thinking for some time what answers she should give the little old man, she fell asleep on the hemp. The little old man did not fail to make his appearance the first thing next morning, and remained all day spinning the gold thread. The work progressed before their eyes, and it was only when evening came that he repeated his questions. Not receiving a satisfactory answer, he vanished in a fit of mocking laughter. Helen sat down by the window to think, but think as she might, no answer to these puzzling questions occurred to her. While thus wondering, the hungry old man again came by, and she gave him her dinner. She was heart-sick, and her eyes were full of tears, for she thought she would never guess the spinner's name, nor of what stuff his boots were made, unless perhaps God would help her. "Why are you so sad?" asked the old man when he had eaten and drunk. "Tell me the cause of your grief, dear lady." For a long time she would not tell him, thinking it would be useless, but at last, yielding to his entreaties, she gave a full account of the conditions under which the gold thread was made, explaining that unless she could answer the little old man's questions satisfactorily, she feared some great misfortune would befall her. The old man listened attentively. Then, nodding his head, he said, "In coming through the forest today, I passed close to a large pile of burning wood, round which were placed 9 iron pots. A little man in a red cap was running round and jumping over them, singing these words, 'My sweet friend, fair Helen, at the red castle near, 2 days and 2 nights seeks my name to divine. She'll never find out, so the 3rd night 'tis clear. My sweet friend, fair Helen, can't fail to be mine. Hurrah, for my name is Kinka. Martinko, hurrah, for my boots are of doggy's skin.' Oh, now that is exactly what you want to know, my dear girl, so do not forget, and you are saved." And with these words the old man vanished. Helen was greatly astonished, but she took care to fix in her memory all that the good fellow had told her, and then went to sleep, feeling that she could face tomorrow without fear. On the 3rd day, very early in the morning, the little old man appeared and set busily to work, for he knew that all the hemp must be spun before sunset, and that then he should be able to claim his rights. When evening came, all the hemp was gone, and the room shone with the brightness of the golden thread. As soon as his work was done, the queer little old man with the red cap drew himself up with a great deal of assurance, and with his hands in his pockets strutted up and down before Helen, ordering her to tell him his right name and to say of what stuff the boots were made, but he felt certain that she would not be able to answer aright. "Your name is Kinka Martinko, and your boots are made of dogskin," she replied without the slightest hesitation. At these words he spun round on the floor like a bobbin, tore out his hair and beat his breast with rage, roaring so that the very walls trembled. "It is lucky for you that you have guessed. If you had not, I should have torn you to pieces on this very spot." So saying, he rushed out of the window like a whirlwind. Helen felt deeply grateful towards the old man who had told her the answers and hoped to be able to thank him in person. But he never appeared again. The Prince of the Red Castle was very pleased with her for having accomplished her task so punctually and perfectly, and he married her as he had promised. Helen was truly thankful to have escaped the dangers that had threatened her, and her happiness as a princess was greater than she had dared hope. She had, too, such a good stock of gold thread that she never had occasion to spin any more all her life long. The story of the plentiful tablecloth, the avenging wand, the sash that becomes a lake, and the terrible helmet. Now it once happened that one of the king's herdsmen had 3 sons. 2 of these lads were supposed to be very sharp-witted, while the youngest was thought to be very stupid indeed. The elder sons helped their father to look after the flocks and herds, while the fool, so they called him, was good for nothing but sleeping and amusing himself. He would pass whole days and nights slumbering peacefully on the stove, only getting off when forced to by others, or when he was too warm and wished to lie on the other side, or when, hungry and thirsty, he wanted food and drink. His father had no love for him, and called him a ne'er-do-well. His brothers often tormented him by dragging him off the stove and taking away his food. Indeed, he would many a time have gone hungry if his mother had not been good to him and fed him on the quiet. She caressed him fondly, for why should he suffer? Thought she, if he does happen to have been born a fool. Besides, who can understand the ways of God? It sometimes happens that the wisest men are not happy, while the foolish, when harmless and gentle, lead contented lives. One day, on their return from the fields, the fool's 2 brothers dragged him off the stove, and taking him into the yard, where they gave him a sound thrashing, they turned him out of the house, saying, "Go, fool, and lose no time, for you shall have neither food nor lodging until you bring us a basket of mushrooms from the wood." The poor lad was so taken by surprise, he hardly understood what his brothers wanted him to do. After pondering for a while, he made his way towards a small oak forest, where everything seemed to have a strange and marvelous appearance, so strange that he did not recognize the place. As he walked, he came to a small dead tree stump, on the top of which he placed his cap, saying, "Every tree here raises its head to the skies and wears a good cap of leaves. But you, my poor friend, are bareheaded. You will die of cold. You must be among your brothers, as I am among mine, a born fool. Take then my cap." And, throwing his arms round the dead stump, he wept and embraced it tenderly. At that moment, an oak which stood near began to walk towards him as if it were alive. The poor fellow was frightened and about to run away. But the oak spake like a human being and said, "Do not fly. Stop a moment and listen to me. This withered tree is my son, and up to this time no one has grieved for his dead youth but me. You have now watered him with your tears, and in return for your sympathy you shall henceforward have anything you ask of me on pronouncing these words. O oak tree so green, and with acorns of gold, your friendship to prove I will try. In heaven's good name now to beg I'll make bold, my needs then, O kindly supply." At the same moment a shower of golden acorns fell, The fool filled his pockets, thanked the oak, and bowing to her returned home. "Well, stupid, where are the mushrooms?" cried one of his brothers. "I have some mushrooms off the oak in my pockets. Eat them yourself then, for you will get nothing else, you good-for-nothing. What have you done with your cap?" "I put it on a poor stump of a tree that stood by the wayside, for its head was uncovered, and I was afraid it might freeze." He then scrambled on to the top of the stove, and as he lay down, some of the golden acorns fell out of his pocket. So bright were they shone like sunbeams in the room. In spite of the fool's entreaties, the brothers picked them up and gave them to their father, who hastened to present them to the king, telling him that his idiot son had gathered them in the wood. The king immediately sent a detachment of his guards to the forest to find the oak which bore golden acorns. But their efforts were fruitless, for, though they hunted in every nook and corner of the forest, they found not a single oak that bore acorns of gold. At first the king was very angry, but when he grew calmer, he sent for his herdsman and said to him, "Tell your son, the fool, that he must bring me, by this evening, a cask filled to the brim with these precious golden acorns. If he obeys my commands, you shall never lack bread and salt, and you may rest assured that my royal favor will not fail you in time of need." The herdsman gave his youngest son the king's message. "The king, I see," he replied, "is fond of a good bargain. He does not ask, he commands, and insists upon a fool fetching him acorns of solid gold in return for promises made of air. No, I shall not go." And neither prayers nor threats were of the slightest avail to make him change his mind. At last his brothers pulled him forcibly off the stove, put his coat on him and a new cap, and dragged him into the yard, where they gave him a good beating and drove him away, saying, "Now, you stupid, lose no time, be off and be quick. If you return without the golden acorns, you shall have neither supper nor bed." What was the poor fellow to do? For a long time he wept, then crossing himself, he went in the direction of the forest. He soon reached the dead stump upon which his cap still rested, and going up to the mother oak, said to her, "O oak tree so green, and with acorns of gold, in my helplessness I to thee cry, in heaven's great name now to beg I make bold, my pressing needs pray satisfy." The oak moved and shook its branches, but instead of golden acorns, a tablecloth fell into the fool's hands, and the tree said, "Keep this cloth always in your possession and for your own use. When you want a benefit by it, you need only say, 'Old tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer, may he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear.'" When it had uttered these words, the oak ceased to speak, and the fool, thanking her, bowed and turned towards home. On his way, he wondered to himself how he should tell his brothers, and what they would say. But above all, he thought how his good mother would rejoice to see the feast-giving tablecloth. When he had walked about half the distance, he met an old beggar who said to him, "See what a sick and ragged old man I am. For the love of God, give me a little money or some bread." The fool spread his tablecloth on the grass, and inviting the beggar to sit down, said, "O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer, may he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear." Then a whistling was heard in the air, and overhead something shone brightly. At the same instant a table, spread as for a royal banquet, appeared before them. Upon it were many different kinds of food, flasks of mead and glasses of the choicest wine. The plate was of gold and silver. The fool and the beggar-man crossed themselves and began to feast. When they had finished, the whistling was again heard, and everything vanished. The fool folded up his tablecloth and went on his way. But the old man said, "If you will give me your tablecloth, you shall have this wand in exchange. When you say certain words to it, it will set upon the person or persons pointed out, and give them such a thrashing that to get rid of it, they will give you anything they possess." The fool thought of his brothers and exchanged the tablecloth for the wand, after which they both went on their respective ways. Suddenly the fool remembered that the oak had ordered him to keep the tablecloth for his own use, and that by parting with it he had lost the power of giving his mother an agreeable surprise. So he said to the wand, "Thou self-propelling, ever-willing, fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast, providing tablecloth back to my hand. Thy praise I'll sing." The wand went off like an arrow after the old man, quickly overtook him, and throwing itself upon him began to beat him dreadfully, crying out in a loud voice, "For others' goods you seem to have a liking. Stop, thief, or sure your back, I'll keep on striking." The poor beggar tried to run away, but it was of no use, for the wand followed him, striking all the time and repeating the same words over and over again. So, in spite of his anxiety to keep the tablecloth, he was forced to throw it away and flee. The wand brought the cloth back to the fool, who again went on his way towards home, thinking of the surprise in store for his mother and brothers. He had not gone very far when a traveller, carrying an empty wallet, accosted him, saying, "For the love of God, give me a small coin or a morsel of food, for my bag is empty and I am very hungry. I have, too, a long journey before me." The fool again spread his tablecloth on the grass and said, "O tablecloth, cool for the poor, the hungry and thirsty, makes cheer. May he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear." A whistling was heard in the air. Something shone brightly overhead, and a table, spread as for a royal feast, placed itself before them. It was laid with a numerous variety of dishes, hydromel and costly wines. The fool and his guest sat down, crossed themselves, and ate to their heart's content. When they had finished, whistling was again heard, and everything vanished. The fool folded the cloth up carefully, and was about to continue his journey when the traveller said, "Will you exchange your tablecloth for my waistband? When you say to it certain words, it will turn into a deep lake, upon which you may float at will. The words run thus: O marvellous, wonderful, lake-forming band, for my safety, and not for my fun, bear me in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that I from my foes need not run." The fool thought his father would find it very convenient always to have water at hand for the king's flocks, so he gave his tablecloth in exchange for the belt, which he wound round his loins, and taking the wand in his hand, they went off in opposite directions. After a little while, the fool began to reflect on what the oak had told him about keeping the tablecloth for his own use, and he remembered, too, that he was depriving himself of the power of giving his mother a pleasant surprise. Thereupon he said the magic words to his wand, "Thou self-propelling, ever-willing, fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast, providing tablecloth back to my hand. Thy praise I'll sing." The wand at once started in pursuit of the poor traveller, whom it began to beat, at the same time crying out, "For others' goods you seem to have a liking. Stop, thief, or sure your back, I'll keep on striking." The man was scared out of his wits, and tried to escape the wand's blows, but it was of no use, so he was forced to throw the tablecloth away and run at the top of his speed. The wand brought the tablecloth back to his master. The latter hid it under his coat, rearranged the waistband, and taking the faithful wand in his hand, again went towards home. As he walked, he rejoiced to think of the pleasure he should have in exercising the wand on his wicked brothers, of his father's satisfaction when, by the help of the waistband, he could always have water for the king's flocks, even in the driest weather, and of his mother's joy on witnessing the wonders of the feast-giving tablecloth. These pleasant thoughts were interrupted by a soldier, lame, clothed in rags, and covered with wounds. He had once been a famous warrior. "I am pursued by misfortunes," said he to the fool. "I was once a brave soldier, and fought valiantly in my youth. Now I am lamed for life, and on this lonely road have found no one to give me a morsel of food. Have pity on me, and give me a little bread." The fool sat down on the grass, and spreading out his tablecloth said, "O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry, and thirsty makes cheer, may he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear." A whistling was heard in the air, something bright shone overhead, and then before them stood a table, spread as for a royal feast, loaded with dainty dishes, mead, and costly wines. When they had eaten and drunk as much as they wanted, the whistling was again heard, and then everything vanished. The fool was folding up his tablecloth, when the soldier said, "Will you give me your tablecloth in exchange for this 6-horned helmet? It will fire itself off and instantly destroy the object pointed out. You have but to turn it round on your head and repeat these words, 'O magic helmet, never thou dost want for powder nor shot, allay my fears and fire now, just where I point, fail not.' You will see that it fires off immediately, and even if your enemy were a mile away, he would fall." The fool was delighted with the idea, and thought how useful such a hat would be in any sudden danger. It would even serve him to defend his country, the king, or himself. So he handed the tablecloth to the soldier, put the helmet on his head, took his wand in his hand, and again set his face towards home. When he had gone some distance, and the soldier was almost out of sight, he began to think of what the oak had said about not parting with the tablecloth, and of how his dear mother could not now enjoy the pleasant surprise he had been dreaming about. So he said to the wand, "Thou self-propelling, ever-willing, fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast-providing tablecloth back to my hand, thy praise I'll sing." The wand dashed after the soldier, and having reached him began to beat him, crying out, "For others' goods you seem to have a liking. Stop, thief, or show your back. I'll keep on striking." The soldier was still a powerful man, and in spite of his wound turned right about face, intending to give blow for blow. But the wand was too much for him, and he soon found resistance useless. So, overcome by pain rather than fear, he threw away the tablecloth and took to his heels. The faithful wand brought the tablecloth back to his master, who, glad to have it again, once more turned towards home. He soon left the forest, crossed the fields, and came in sight of his father's house. At a little distance therefrom, his brothers met him, and said crossly, "Well, stupid, where are the golden acorns?" The fool looked at them and laughed in their faces. Then he said to his wand, "O self-propelling, ever-willing, fighting wand, strike with thy usual fire, my ever-scolding, teasing, worrying brother band, for they have roused my ire." The wand needed no second bidding, and darting out of his hand began to thrash the brothers soundly, crying out like a reasoning creature, "Your brother has often your blows felt, alack! Now taste it yourselves. Hope you like it, whack, whack." The brothers were overpowered, and felt all the while as if boiling water were being poured over their heads. Yelling with pain, they began to run at full speed, and soon disappeared, with clouds of dust flying round them. The wand then came back to the fool's hand. He went into the house, climbed on the stove, and told his mother all that had happened. Then he cried, "O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer, let us within our cottage door feed off you without stint or fear." A whistling was heard in the air, something bright shone overhead, and then a table, laid as for a royal banquet, was placed before them, covered with dainty meats, glasses, and bottles of mead and wine. The whole service was of gold and silver. As the fool and his mother were about to begin the feast, the herdsman entered. He stopped, dumb with amazement, but when invited to partake, began to eat and drink with great enjoyment. At the end of the meal, the whistling was again heard, and everything vanished completely. The herdsman set off in hot haste to the court to tell the king of this new marvel. Thereupon his majesty sent one of his heroes in search of the fool, whom he found stretched on the stove. "If you value your life, listen and obey the king's orders," said the paladin. "He commands you to send him by me your tablecloth. Then you shall have your share of his royal favor. But if not, you will always remain a poor fool, and will, moreover, be treated as a refractory prisoner. We teach them how to behave, you understand?" "Oh yes, I understand." And then he pronounced the magic words, "O self-propelling, ever-willing, fighting, wand, go, soundly thrash that man. The most deceiving, dangerous wretch in all the land, so hurt him all you can." The wand sprang from the fool's hand with the speed of lightning, and struck the paladin 3 times in the face. He immediately fled, but the wand was after him, hitting him all the time, and crying out, "Mere promises are children's play, so do not throw your breath away. But think of something true to say, you rogue, when next you come our way." Defeated and filled with consternation, the paladin returned to the king and told him about the wand, and how badly he had been beaten. When the king heard that the fool possessed a wand that struck of itself, he wanted it so much that for a time he forgot all about the tablecloth, and sent some of his soldiers with orders to bring him back the wand. When they entered the cottage, the fool, as usual, was lying on the stove. "Deliver up the wand to us instantly," said they. "The king is willing to pay any price you ask, but if you refuse, he will take it from you by force." Instead of replying, the fool unwound the waistband, saying to it as he did so, "O marvelous, wonderful, lake-forming band, for my safety and not for my fun, bear me in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that I from my foes need not run." There was a shimmering in the air, while at the same moment everything around them disappeared, and a beautiful lake, long, wide, and deep, was seen, surrounded by green fields. Fish with golden scales and eyes of pearls played in the clear water. In the center, in a small silver skiff, rode a man whom the soldiers recognized as the Fool. They remained some time looking at this miracle, and then ran off to tell the king. Now, when the king heard thereof, he was so anxious to possess the lake, or rather the waistband that produced the lake, that he sent a whole battalion of soldiers to take the fool prisoner. This time they managed to get hold of him while he was asleep, but as they were about to tie his hands, he turned his hat round and said, "O magic helmet, never thou dost want for powder nor shot, allay my fears and fire now. Just where I point, fail not." Instantly 100 bullets whistled through the air, amid clouds of smoke and loud reports. Many of the soldiers fell dead, others took refuge in the wood, whence they returned to the king to give an account of what had taken place. Whereupon the king flew into a violent rage, furious that he had as yet failed to take the fool. But his wish to possess the feast-giving tablecloth, the magic wand, the lake-forming sash, and above all, the helmet with 24 horns, was stronger than ever. Having reflected for some days on the best ways and means to attain his object, he resolved to try the effect of kindness, and sent for the fool's mother. "Tell your son, the fool," said his majesty to the woman, that my charming daughter and I send greeting, and that we shall consider it an honor if he will come here and show us the marvelous things he possesses. Should he feel inclined to make me a present of them, I will give him half my kingdom and will make him my heir. You may also say that the princess, my daughter, will choose him for her husband." The good woman hastened home to her son, whom she advised to accept the king's invitation and show him his treasures. The fool wound the waistband round his loins, put the helmet on his head, hid the tablecloth in his breast, took his magic wand in his hand, and started off to go to the court. The king was not there on his arrival, but he was received by the paladin, who saluted him courteously. Music played, and the troops did him military honors. In fact, he was treated far better than he had expected. On being presented to the king, he took off his helmet, and bowing low, said, "O king, I am come to lay at the foot of your throne my tablecloth, waistband, wand, and helmet. In return for these gifts, I beg that your favor may be shown to the most humble of your subjects. Tell me then, fool, what price you want for these goods." "Not money, sire. A fool of my sort cares very little about money." "Has not the king promised my mother that he will give me in exchange the half of his kingdom and the hand of his daughter in marriage? These are the gifts I claim." After these words, the paladin was filled with envy at the good fortune of the fool, and made a sign for the guards to enter. The soldiers seized the poor fellow, dragged him out into the courtyard, and they killed him treacherously to the sound of drums and trumpets, after which they covered him over with earth. Now it happened that when the soldiers stabbed him, his blood spurted out, and some of the drops fell beneath the princess's window. The maiden wept bitterly at the sight, watering the blood-stained ground with her tears. And lo! Marvelous to relate, an apple tree grew out of the blood-sprinkled earth, and it grew so rapidly that its branches soon touched the windows of her rooms. By noon it was covered with blossom, while at eventide ripe red apples hung thereon. As the princess was admiring them, she noticed that one of the apples trembled, and when she touched it, it fell into the bosom of her dress. This took her fancy, and she held it in her hand. Meanwhile, the sun had set, night had fallen, and everyone in the palace was asleep, except the guard, the paladin, and the princess. The guard, sword in hand, patrolled up and down, for it was his duty. The princess toyed with her pretty little apple and could not sleep. The paladin, who had gone to bed, was aroused by a sound that made his blood run cold, for the avenging wand stood before him and began to beat him soundly. And although he rushed from the room trying to escape from it, it followed him, crying out, "False paladin, you worthless man, do not so envious be. Why act unjustly, when you can both just and honest be? For others' goods, why have you such a liking? You rogue, you thief, be sure I'll keep on striking." The unhappy man wept and cried for mercy, but the wand still continued to strike. The princess was distressed on hearing these cries of distress, and she watered her much-cherished apple with her tears. And, strange to tell, the apple grew and changed its shape. Thus continuing to change, it suddenly turned into a handsome young man, even the very same who had been killed that morning. "Lovely princess, I salute you," said the fool. "The cunning of the paladin caused my death, but with your tears you have restored me to life. Your father promised to give you to me. Are you willing?" "If such be the king's wish, I consent," replied she, as she gave him her hand with a tender look. As he spoke, the door opened, admitting the helmet, which placed itself upon his head, the sash, which wound itself round his waist, the tablecloth, which hid itself in one of his pockets, and the avenging wand, which placed itself in his hand. Then came the king, all out of breath, and wondering what the noise was about. He was amazed to see the fool alive again, and even more so that he should be with the princess. The young fellow, fearing the king's wrath, cried out, "O marvelous, wonderful lake-forming band, for my safety, and not for my fun, bear us in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that we from our foes need not run." There was a shimmering in the air, and then everything disappeared, while on the lawn before the palace stretched a wide, deep lake, in the crystal water of which swam little fish with eyes of pearl and scales of gold. Far away rode the princess and the fool in a silver skiff. The king stood on the shores of the lake and signed to them to return. When they had landed, they knelt at his feet and avowed their mutual love. Upon which his majesty bestowed his blessing, the lake disappeared, and they again found themselves in the princess's apartments. The king called a special meeting of his council, at which he explained how things had turned out, that he had made the fool his heir, and betrothed him to his daughter, and had put the paladin in prison. The fool gave the king his magic treasures and told him what words to say in each case. Next day all their wishes were fulfilled. The fool of the family was married to the princess, and at the same time received half the kingdom with the promise of succession to the throne. And the wedding feast, to which all the rich and noble of the land were invited, exceeded in its magnificence and splendor any other festival ever seen or heard of.